Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Philosophy for the People podcast. I almost forgot the name of my own podcast because it's been so long since I've done anything on it. Like, what is this thing called again? Two very special guests here with me today, Dr. Brian Besong and Joe Schmid, who, Joe, we've obviously interacted kind of indirectly for a while. It is a real treat to finally sit down and have a conversation with you and have you here. So I want to thank you both for taking the time for this discussion. That's what it is. Joe and Brian are mostly going to be expanding upon previous discussions that we've had here on this channel related to natural law. We're not going to rewind the tape and get back to the fundamentals of natural law theory. We're going to assume a fair amount coming into this, and we thought it would be very helpful to bring Joe on to really just sort of present various challenges to natural law. And I don't want to totally speak for you, Joe, but I think you mentioned before that this is sort of exploratory for you or something like that. I guess maybe that would be a good place to start. I'll just kick it over to you, and you could kind of state, your general position on these matters and what you hope that we are able to get out of today's discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, Pat, for inviting me on, and thanks, Brian, for doing this. I'm really excited. This is mainly exploratory, as you said. I don't specialize, full disclosure, I don't specialize in normative ethics. I am not a normative ethicist, okay? I'm not an ethicist. Some of the points will involve me, like asking Brian questions or posing arguments for general discussion, rather than necessarily defending them. Now, don't get me wrong. I do think some of the arguments I'll canvass very likely work, okay? So, that's like a personal confession. But others that we will in fact canvass, I actually do think likely fail and have successful responses. And for others, I simply don't know whether they work. So I guess the purpose of the video is, in large part, to just kind of showcase how a philosophically minded non-specialist in ethics would kind of view issues pertaining to natural law theory. I'm a metaphysician and a philosopher of religion, so and also just to showcase the sorts of questions and problems and arguments and outstanding issues that might exist in light of the previous discussions that you mentioned. So I hope it at least helps me, others, and the viewers to, more carefully and critically think about natural law theory. So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Joe. And Joe prepared this beautiful document here. So if you're just listening on the iTunes version afterwards and you really want to treat your eyes to a really well formatted Word document, head over to the YouTube channel. We'll try and obviously make all the details known and accessible if you're not watching. Brian, before we begin, any initial remarks?
Yeah, no, Joe, I'm really pleased that you were able to do this. And so I consider it a personal favor and appreciate it. And I think it's really an advantage that the audience can hear a non-specialist think through these issues. In some ways, you got no dog in the fight. And so it's easier for you to say, okay, here's an argument, I think this works, or here's an argument, I don't think it works. And my hope is, like, as we go through these, you can also identify for the audience what you consider to be, like, the top arguments, the A or S tier, and then B and C level arguments. I'll try to make a case for the natural law position, no matter how strong or weak the counter argument is. And one thing I might say is, as the audience would probably assume, the position that I take on natural law is the classic natural law position, but that doesn't mean that my formulation or my answers here have to be the canonical answers in each of those cases. And in some cases, I might change my mind later after having taken a position in our discussion. So, yeah. And, I should add one last thing is, having looked through this document, this is absolutely the most thorough. I expect nothing less from Joe. This is the most thorough critical analysis of natural law theory that I've ever seen. And, most audiences would be aware that modernity included this natural law tradition alongside some really top-notch thinkers who were not sticking with the natural law normative theory, and nobody produced anything half as thorough as what Joe has done. So you've done historical philosophy of service, Joe.
I appreciate it. And yeah, if people want to email me for my notes about this particular discussion, I can share with them. I took a little bit more extended notes. They're a little bit in Joe speak, as it were. So they may not be as comprehensible to people, but I'll also share that with you, Brian, and Pat. So
awesome. Thank you, Joe. Yeah,
absolutely. Okay, so how about we just dig in? So
Please.
I mean,
Yeah.
I broke this up into 4 different sections. The first section is just like a brief survey of different ethical challenges, normative ethical challenges, epistemological challenges, metaphysical challenges, and metaethical challenges, which are distinct from the 3 subsequent kinds of challenges, which are in sections 2 through 4. So section 2 is the egoism challenge. Section 3 is just a family that I've kind of termed conceivability challenges. I don't know. I don't think there's a name for it. I kind of just came up with that. And then the 4th one is just potential counterexamples. And of course, whenever I say natural law theory throughout, I'm going to be referring to classical natural law theory and maybe a bit more specifically, at least as context makes it clear, Brian's version thereof. Okay. So again, moving on to section 1, this is not like a survey of all of the challenges faced by natural law theory, but rather just some of them distinctively arising from certain domains. And I want to be pretty brief with these, just to kind of help the audience and whatnot. So if we scroll down, there are some potential metaethical challenges to natural law theory. Are you able to, is there some way to sort of scroll down on that?
Sorry, Joe, I forgot that I was in charge here.
Oh, yeah.
I'm already
No
failing
worries.
as the host. So
No
let me,
worries.
let me,
No worries.
Let me do better. Let me step it up. Let's see.
We're just
All
on
right.
the 1.1.
I have one job.
Right. Okay. So we're on section 1.1. So there are some like potential metaethical challenges that one might raise. Typically, these are actually just going to be challenging the whole ethical enterprise. So I'm not interested in pursuing these in much detail here. And I don't accept many of them. So there are, of course, challenges from error theory, according to which all positive claims about what's morally good, bad, right, or wrong are false. There are debunking arguments that could challenge this whole enterprise. Non-cognitivism may very well challenge this whole enterprise. Technically speaking, non-cognitivism is the view that, our moral judgments are not truth-apt. They don't express propositions that can be either true or false. Instead, they're like mere expressions of emotion or disguised commands or something like that. Technically speaking, that's compatible with normative ethical theories, but if you accept the Frege-Geach problem for non-cognitivism, then arguably it's not going to be compatible with most normative ethical theories, because most normative ethical theories involve embedding ethical judgments within larger sentential constructions, and which are supposed to be truth-apt according to the theory. And yet, if you accept the Frege-Geach problem, you're not going to be able to have that if you're a non-cognitivist. So anyway, I don't want to go into these issues. I don't accept any of these. There's also an issue pertaining to attributivism. So at least some natural law theorists think that goodness is an attributive rather than a predicative adjective. As far as I can tell, that's not like a commitment of natural law theory. So I don't think we really need to go into this. Just for the audience, like a predictive adjective is one where like if you pair it with a noun in a sentence, you can like validly infer that the subject of the sentence falls into at least 2 distinct classes. So like a red car. Well, hey, the car must be both in the class of red things and also in the class of cars. By contrast, an attributive adjective is one where like you can't do that. So if you pair it with a noun in a sentence, you cannot validly infer that the subject of the sentence falls into at least 2 distinct categories. So consider like a heavy feather. You can't actually infer that belongs to the class of like heavy things and feathers. Instead, it's something like heavy for a feather. Or think of like tallness, like being tall qua child. Or think of largeness, like a large pebble. Something can be large for a pebble, but not like a large simpliciter. But anyway.
Joe, I'll say that's the best explanation of that distinction that I've heard.
Oh, okay. I appreciate that. So some of that is mine. Some of it does also come from Amos, because I consulted him for other stuff. So full credit goes out to Amos as well for a little bit of help with that.
No, that's great.
I appreciate that. So again, some natural law theorists, definitely not all, as far as I can tell, think that goodness is like only attributive, whereas there is a perfectly legitimate moral predicative sense of goodness. I don't think we need to go into that because it's not a commitment of natural law theory. And then there is finally a metaethical view that's often, though as far as I can tell, again, not a commitment of, so often associated with, but as far as I can tell, not a commitment of natural law theory, which is moral naturalism. So according for the audience, moral naturalism just says that like moral properties like goodness and whatnot, they're reducible to descriptive or natural properties. For instance, like fulfilling one's natural ends. But as far as I can tell, it seems to me that a natural law theorist can say that, hey, moral goodness, yeah, sure, that's an irreducible non-natural property, but it's just had by something if, only if, and because it fulfills one's natural ends or something like that. and they don't need to say that like what goodness is or what it consists in or what it reduces to is like the fulfillment of natural ends or something having to do with flourishing, as far as I can tell. Is that right, Brian?
Yeah, and I was just going to recommend to the audience, if anyone's interested in I think this is a complicated question in natural law, whether it's moral naturalist or non-naturalist. So there's a great book by Stephen Brock called The Light That Binds, where he reviews the Thomistic debate about just exactly how natural law counts as law. And it seems to require, at least for Aquinas, a lawgiver, which is God. So it's really hard to say. It depends a lot on what theses are required to be a naturalist, whether natural law will be naturalist or non-naturalist.
Okay.
It'd be non-naturalist in some accounts and naturalist in others.
Okay, yeah. So I mean, that's interesting. So I just, one of my purposes for bringing all this up is to at least like flag some background issues for the audience. Like, even if, let's say, all the potential counterexamples to natural law theory could be answered, and even if the egoism objection could be answered, like, I at least want to flag for the audience that there are like background issues, more fundamental issues that still one could get caught up on and not accept natural law theory on the basis of. I mean, I myself, for instance, I admit to being a pretty robust non-naturalist. I think Moore's broadly speaking, like Moore's open question argument is pretty good. I have this just too different intuition that I think the kind of normative authority and bindingness of morality is just like very categorically different from any descriptive goings on, even if it has to do with fulfilling natural ends or things like that. That's not to say that there's no explanatory relation, or there could be no explanatory relation between descriptive goings on and normative goings on. But I myself would lean towards a pretty robust non-naturalism. So I'm just flagging that for the audience. So those are metaethical potential challenges. There are some metaphysical challenges as well. So this is section 1.2. So there are, of course, different non-Aristotelian accounts of function that one might wield that would be perhaps unfavorable to natural law theory. So etiological accounts, which broadly speaking say that like the function of x's, where x is some like trait or organ or mechanism or system, is whatever x's do that explains why there are x's. Or maybe to put it like slightly differently, you could say that like the natural function of x is to phi, if and only if it was like selected to phi or something like that. Let me just run through these, and then I'll turn it over to Brian to see what he wants to say about these. There are just a few of them. I'll be really brief. There are also, of course, like biological advantage accounts of function, which again, these are all like broadly speaking reductionist accounts of function, which don't take it to be irreducible, and some of them don't take it even to be intrinsic, but others do. But anyway, biological accounts, these say that the function of a mechanism or trait or organ or system is essentially just like the biological value or utility of that mechanism or trait or organ or system for the relevant organism. And here utility is understood typically as contributions to survival or extended fitness. And so this one actually isn't like backward looking. This one is more forward looking and independent of history. And then there are also internal maintenance accounts of function. These say that something like x's function is whatever x does that contributes to the maintenance of the overall organismic system in which it is embedded. So this one actually is far less forward looking. It's not like talking about contributions to a broad survival and extended fitness. I mean, it's partially about that, but like it's more about like the current maintenance of the biological system. So,
and Joe, am I remembering? Is this Peter Graham's account?
Oh man, I forget the details. So I want to say yes, but I can't confirm that. I'm sorry.
Okay, sorry.
No, it's all good. It's all good. So anyway, I just wanted to like again put this on the radar for the audience. Maybe Brian, this is one case where I can turn it over to you to say what you want about these. But like this is a very active area of debate among philosophers of biology and metaphysicians. And at least to me, it's not clear how we should understand biological function. And given that it's mired in controversy and I'm not an expert on that particular area, like I myself don't have strong credences in that domain. And I feel like I'd have to have strong credences to be in a position to accept natural law theory. So I'll turn it over to you, Brian.
Yeah, very briefly, because I suspect that the later stuff is where you want to focus most attention. So I just say I don't like backward-looking etiological accounts simply because, to me, even someone who's not a natural law theorist will have to account for exaptation. as a biological phenomenon, which is a repurposing of previously acquired traits for new purposes. And so that to me favors something like the biological advantage account. The internal maintenance account, as far as I know, is a newer account. I haven't thought through it entirely, but it seems to me that reproduction is not internal maintenance, but that would be, it seems like a biological function. I'm not sure if that would provide biological advantage. So I guess we'd have to cash out whether biological advantage is to species or to like the token member of the species.
Yeah, I think I think that would fall under extended fitness, because extended fitness in biology, as I understand it, is something. It's not just like your own survival and whatnot, but also includes like your reproductive success, the success, like the fitness of close kin, and potential offspring as well.
Okay, so that you're saying that does fit the biological advantage
I
account.
do think so. I
Okay.
mean, I'm not a specialist in this.
Yeah, so I guess what I'd want to say is the biological advantage account of the three mentioned seems the most promising. My question philosophically would be, why does the biology get preference? Like, why is that more primitive or fundamental than other elements of a thing's good? So it seems like let's do biological advantage, but then just expand it a bit. Instead of biological advantage, other forms of advantage could also be included as accounts of function. And then we've gone from a non-Aristotelian account to an Aristotelian account, because instead of biological advantage, you might call it like eudaimonistic advantage. And there we just seem like a straightforward Aristotelian account.
Yeah. So
and one reason,
yeah.
oh, sorry, briefly, one reason to prefer that over the simple biological advantage account is these philosophical objections could be undermined self-referentially if it turns out that philosophy is not one of the functions of the mind. And so if it doesn't seem like it's offering us a biological advantage to do philosophy, in fact, you might think it's biologically sacrificing, then it seems like, well, maybe we should expand on the biological advantage and have other advantages included, so as to not be self-referentially incoherent. And that, again, favors an Aristotelian account.
Yeah. So just briefly on that last point, it's not clear to me why it would be self-referentially incoherent unless we have some sort of like teleological account of like justification or something. Because I mean, presumably they're going to say something like, our ability to reason, or not a reason rather, but like do philosophy. That is something like a spandrel. It's an outworking of our general capacities for reason and whatnot. And so it's not like, and moreover, they don't need to assign particular, like proponents of these accounts don't need to assign particular like normative significance to.
You're right. I'm assuming a normative.
Right. So,
constraint.
right. So if they don't take it to be, like epistemically normative to, use your cognitive faculties in accordance with their natural function, and instead it's epistemic, it can be epistemically permissible to use them in ways that go beyond, or in ways that are just like spandrel ways, then I don't think they will succumb to that kind of self-defeat. And they might try to, they might try to motivate that by like imagining. And again, we don't need to get into this. They might just imagine like, well, hey, like we could imagine us having evolved in like such that like our natural cognitive mechanisms were super duper like epistemically awry, and we shouldn't be reasoning in those ways. Like there's some independent truths about how we should be epistemically reasoning. But anyway, let's table that discussion. And
maybe I should say very briefly, if you've got the intuition that doing philosophy can be a function of our brains, that's enough to push out up a biological, I would think.
Yeah, I mean, I guess ordinary. Well, yeah. When I say like, oftentimes we say is a function of something, we just mean like it can do it. It's like a power that it can do. But like spandrels are powers of something. So maybe like it's not like a telos that for the sake of which it exists, but it is something that one can do and can do well. There are still normative standards for it. But let's move on. To the. I mean, this one too, metaphysical challenges to there being like irreducible intrinsic natural teleology. These are also going to be present. So, oftentimes people will object to positing, irreducible intrinsic natural teleology on the grounds that, hey, this posit seems explanatorily dispensable, in the sense that we can explain things without appealing to them, just by appeal to the underlying microchemical properties of the relevant biological systems, etc. And so it's almost like, why posit these things when we can explain all that really needs to be explained by appeal to more fundamental, not goal-oriented processes, microphysical goings on. And another potential thing here, before I turn it over to you, Brian, to comment on this, is that this can be motivated also by just the broader success of the kind of naturalistic enterprise, like in the past. So the story goes, maybe this is a bit romanticized, but, science was, as it were, kind of held back by the postulation of forms and teleological ends and whatnot. And the rise of the mechanistic philosophy has been, at least broadly speaking, very, very successful for the development and proliferation of science and its success. And we seem to be able to increasingly explain more and more without needing to appeal to end directedness and things like that. So especially, at least in the biological domain. I mean, of course, as a card-carrying non-physicalist, I tend to think that we can't do that for the mind. But I wouldn't go Aristotelian about the mind. Anyway. So I'll turn over to you. What do you think about explanatory dispensability challenges to intrinsic natural teleology, as well as just at least generally speaking, the success of the kind of naturalistic mechanistic enterprise?
Yeah. So two things to say. One, this is if you feel a little bit out of your element in doing normative ethics, metaphysics is not. I don't feel like it's my strong suit. So as a by way of punting, I really liked Neil Williams had a book in 2019, an OUP book called, I think it's called A Powers Metaphysic, and he takes these challenges head on. So I liked what he had to say there, and one additional point aside. So I guess I just say, I think those responses can be answered. I don't feel like I'm in a particularly good position to answer that. I haven't thought through those issues as much as others have. One thing I would note, though, is that biological functions and teleology seem harder to eliminate than teleology in other areas. And it seems like biology textbooks are rife with you might say implicit teleological categorizations. You've got all these parts in the body, and these parts are physically adjacent, and the way that we distinguish them is not their location so much as their function. And so it seems like what the spleen is, actually I don't know what the spleen is, maybe that should be the example I pick. Whatever the spleen is, it's a spleen because it does spleeny things. And so it seems like in biology, perhaps in more so than in other areas of science, teleology is part of the stock in trade. Now, I think, for most of the audience, if they're steeped in analytic metaphysics, they're going to think something like, well, that may be in ordinary conversation, but it turns out this reductive project is going to be a success, and we're going to have a translation enterprise. But I'd say that, especially for you, Joe, the same IOU was given by physicalists in the mind. And I think we're still waiting for that translation project to be successful.
Yeah, I mean, so we might think that we probably should go on, but I'll very briefly say a few things.
Yeah.
I mean, we might think we just are not even closer in the case of consciousness, which I tend to think it's just utterly, completely mystifying how neurophysiological goings on in the brain, the particles move left and right, and then somehow we get this magical technicolor phenomenology. We really, I mean, again, we've solved various easy problems of consciousness, oh, well, how does the brain do this? And how does this subserve linguistic function? Whatever. But that more fundamental issue, it's I don't think we've made any progress towards it. Whereas we might think that at least in some cases of biological functions, we've been able to relatively systematically map out underlying mechanistic chemical processes, functions without sort of remainder for anything at the more higher level to be able to explain. And as it were, we can kind of see how that kind of project might be able to be extended. So that's at least one thing that I might want to say there. And then I guess, at least for the audience, I do want to at least flag that this approach doesn't necessarily need to be eliminativist about biological function. Like, it can still be realist. It can say that there are biological functions, and the biologists are saying true things when they talk about the function of the heart and whatnot. You would just need to combine that realism with at least one of the reductive accounts of function, where there are biological functions. It just turns out that they're not irreducible. We can give either an etiological explanation for them, or we can give some kind of internal maintenance explanation, or some kind of biological advantage account where that's cached in terms of the biologist's notions of survival or extended fitness or what have you.
And Joe, for what it's worth, I'm not convinced, maybe I should be, but I'm not convinced that natural law requires irreducible natural teleology. So as long as it's a realist about teleology, like what you're saying, I'm like, yeah, maybe I should be open to that sort of thing in the normative realm too.
Okay, so I think that's a really interesting proposal. I'm gonna have to sit and think about that. Like, as I,
Yeah.
I usually come up with objections like either when I'm like biking or running or something like that. So I'm gonna honestly just have to like ruminate about that, because I think that's a really interesting potential response. And yeah, that's one of those things where it's like philosophy's best done slowly, and I'm gonna have to really sit back and think about this one. But let's move on to. So I'll be super brief with this challenges to powers metaphysics, because it's very similar. Like, a lot of people have objected to, broadly speaking, powers metaphysics on the basis of explanatory dispensability. You know, like, why does opium put one to sleep? We've got an instance of causation here. It seems either vacuous, or at least as close as you can get to vacuous, to say that, you know, it's got the power to put you to sleep. It's like, it doesn't really increase any illumination, or what sort of metaphysical work is this doing? It doesn't seem to explain causation. Maybe we need to appeal to some other account of causation. So a lot of people think that powers are likewise explanatorily dispensable, explanatorily idle. And there are rival metaphysical views which even arguably either do away with powers or have a very reductive account of them, like humanism. I'm not a human. I think there are reasonable objections to metaphysical humanism, particularly its account of laws of nature. But there are some very respected and like humans who could like eat my lunch and like completely destroy me. Like Barry Lower, I mean, he's like a top-notch philosopher, and he's responded, you know, systematically to a lot of the objections that convince me to humanism. And so again, just like for the audience, know that there are background issues here, and background worries that are at play, and that I think one should at least be aware of. And there are other challenges from physics, like at least a number of philosophers of physics, including one of my friends and co-authors, Daniel Linford. Like, he thinks that at least at the fundamental level, physics, like causation, doesn't show up in physics. He thinks at the fundamental level, and this is a rising kind of view in philosophy of physics. It's more so either about laws, structural constraints, dynamical constraints on systems, none of which are cashed out causally. This is also a controversial view, but I sort of just want to flag for the audience that at least somewhat similar issues arise in the case of powers metaphysics as it arises with respect to irreducible intrinsic natural teleology, and just want to flag for the audience that things aren't necessarily smooth sailing, but yeah. Oh, and then, well, super briefly, this is the last one under the metaphysical challenges. I definitely don't want to go into this one because it raises ludicrous issues, like crazy complex issues. But there are challenges to biological kind essentialism issuing from things like vagueness, evolutionary theory. You know, like, some people have tried to argue that if we're like essentialists about biological kinds, as arguably natural law theory requires, it seems like there's going to have to be some kind of like precise cutoff in the evolutionary history at which we got like the first human or something like that, or the first member of certain biological species. And that has struck a lot of people as implausible for various reasons. But we're not, I mean, I don't quite want to go into that, but I'll let Brian, if he wants to add any comments before we get on to epistemology. Otherwise, we can just move.
As far as the powers metaphysics, I just say, I like that Neil Williams book. So
yeah, and I do want to say, like, for the audience, like, I mean, I'm also not like quite opposed to powers metaphysics. In fact, like, I have some sympathies. You know, other people, Stephen Mumford, I forget this other person's first name, but Anjum is another great philosopher who's worked on this. So like, I'm not altogether opposed to powers metaphysics. I mean, I do have like nagging worries, but like, I'm actually sympathetic, and I think, you know, maybe even if we don't go along with that we don't go along with explaining causation in terms of powers because of the normative virtue kind of stuff. Like we might think that powers can still serve other explanatory functions within our theorizing. So we might think they can actually serve a nice role in grounding modality, for instance. And I've written on powers theories and modality. I've published on those, and I have some sympathies. So these challenges that I've raised also are definitely not insuperable. And like I said at the beginning. I'm not even saying that I'm sold on all of them. I mean, again, a lot of these do kind of worry me, but just want to say that for the audience. Okay, the third class. So this is 1.3, Pat. If you want to scroll down, this is epistemology.
Yeah, are we all happy with my scrolling job at this point?
I think it's like stellar.
Yeah,
it's
a lot of ground to make up.
Got
a lot of ground to make up for after this.
Yeah. So the first one here, I don't want to go into because I think it'll just. I don't want to go into it. There are challenges to our general epistemic access to like natural teloi, having to do with like, it seems at least conceivable that basically like everything is radically defective in certain ways. So that like, even though they regularly and for the most part behave in certain ways, it's just like totally divorced from their natural end. Alexander Proust actually, in his forthcoming book, I believe, Norms, Natures, and God, I think he's still writing it in fact. But like he basically, so he, broadly speaking, accepts at least like a slightly modified, not full-blown Thomistic, but like at least a modified Thomistic natural philosophy, where there actually are like built-in ends in nature and whatnot. There are forms. So he, broadly speaking, accepts that, and he actually thinks that this sort of provides like an argument for theism because there actually are lots of different conceivable ways where like things just are like radically defective, just for the most part regularly and whatnot. Like even though we might think that this is kind of odd or strange, it seems totally conceivable, and there are lots of ways for that to be the case. Whereas the more intuitive thought is like, actually, no, there is a kind of harmony between how things behave for the most part and regularly and their actual like natural telos and their natural ends. And he argues that as a kind of harmony argument, there are lots of harmony arguments that have been coming up on before in philosophy. He thinks that like arguably that's going to provide evidence for theism. But like if one is not a theist, one might think that, and if one wants to go in for natural teleology, one might think that there are some potentially skeptical difficulties here with like, it seems totally conceivable that things are just like radically defective, and the way that they behave for the most part and regularly diverges from their like natural end, their kind of proper goal-oriented.
Joe, that brings a question in my mind, because when I took a quick look at your document, I saw you had the egoist challenge, which I know we'll get to, and that immediately brought Proust's forthcoming book to mind, for the reason that for many years he rejected natural law precisely because of this, and he thinks his account overcomes it. So if people
that's interesting.
Yeah, if people are interested in that, they can look to how Proust thinks that he avoids what we're going to talk about here in a minute.
So that's
but he also takes like an Aristotelian optimism, though, doesn't he, for epistemology? So I think his position, it's been a while since, because you're right, it's like a draft. It's really hard to read on this blog. So it's been a while since I read it, but I just felt like I remember him saying that he thought things, and maybe I'm misunderstanding what you're saying, things are not radically, except for human sinfulness. He's got something to say about that. Like the human being might be a special case here, but generally the way things go, or generally the way things are meant to be. Was that wrong? Or
no, that's definitely correct. The thought that I was saying was like, it's like there are lots of conceivable ways that could have failed to be the case.
Oh, sure. Okay,
and theism, we might think, at least given that God like is oriented towards, or in some way would want to produce things.
We want the harmony. I get what you're saying now. Okay,
yeah.
It's sort of a fine tuning type of argument.
It's similar to fine tuning.
It's a harmony, in the class of harmony arguments. Okay, yeah. But anyways, that would be good if people want to look at a really interesting draft of something that relates to this. I'd definitely check out Proust's work on that. But
right, and I guess my purpose of bringing this up is that, like, at least if we're not theists, we might worry that there are challenges to our general epistemic access to natural teloi, given that things could be radically defective in this way. And it's hard to see how we would rule that out, other than just sort of like fist pounding on the table. Like, that's not the case. Like, no. Or like, that's really weird. It's hard to see how we would justify that. But
at a metaphysical level, I agree. Although it does strike me that you could claim some of these are Morian facts. And so at least we've got unrivaled epistemic access to them.
That is true. Although we might worry that, like, if we have a plausible account of like a plausible debunking explanation of those intuitions, right? Like such that we still would have had those intuitions even if they are false, right? Then like the truth of their content actually doesn't predict our having the intuitions better than the falsity of their content. But that's a more Bayesian epistemological challenge. But we don't need to get into that. That's just like a general epistemic axis worry. But like I want to maybe focus a little bit more. So before we went live, I said I want to maybe sink our teeth in a little bit, maybe to something in here. And this is maybe one where I do want to sink our teeth in a little bit. And it's this second point underneath the 1.3 epistemology challenges. And these are challenges specifically to like particular claims about natural teloi. Mm-hmm. So I want to focus on two specifically, and we'll go through these successively. So I'm not going to go through them both before I turn it over to you. I'm just going to talk about the communicative faculty first, and then I'll hear what you want to say, Brian, and maybe we can go back and forth a little bit on it. And then after that, I'll talk about the sexual faculty, and maybe we can go back and forth a little bit about that. So again, we're not talking about, for the audience, we're not really talking about counterexamples here to natural law theory. We're just talking about epistemic challenges to like how we are to justify our claims about the particular natural ends of these particular faculties. Okay. So let's take the communicative faculty first. I've heard at least many natural law theorists say that like revealing one's mind or something like that is the function or end of the communicative faculty. Mm-hmm. But I guess my question is, and I've never quite been able to figure out why, and maybe I'll learn that here. But my question is like, why does this faculty not have whole swaths of other functions? And I ask this because, well, there are a lot of like, cognitive psychologists, evolutionary biologists, evolutionary psychologists who have, theorized about the communication. Mm-hmm. Robin Dunbar and others have proposed that like language evolved not primarily for information transfer, but for like social grooming. So like maintaining social bonds in large groups. And of course, maybe one way to do that is revealing the contents of your mind or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
But we might think that like the natural end is instead something like social grooming, maintaining social bonds, and perhaps other ways to facilitate that end involve not revealing the contents of one's own mind. So that's one sort of proposal. Many evolutionary biologists think that communication serves strategic goals, one of which sort of involves misleading, manipulating others, things like that. So in animal signaling theory, signals are often like manipulative as part of their goal or their function. And perhaps like the communicative faculty could be argued to have as among its ends influence, control, and status regulation in social settings. And lying can very often perhaps be entirely in accord with those natural ends or functions. Communication has also, I believe, been argued to serve the function of, like enabling joint action, with truthfulness only instrumental and subordinate to that primary end, and where being misleading or deceptive or lying can equally be used to enable joint action. And finally, communication, as far as I could tell, has been argued to serve, I guess, more entertainment and aesthetic purposes as well, to which, likewise, truth-telling is often merely instrumental or subordinate. So I guess I'm just wondering, like, why are we to characterize the natural end or function of the communicative faculty as specifically revealing one's own mind, as opposed to just thinking that's one way to fulfill or actualize its other functions, which are primary, and to which truth-telling or revealing one's own mind is subordinate, like social grooming, maintaining social bonds, signaling, status control, other things like that, and where those functions can be like successfully fulfilled by doing something other than revealing one's own mind on particular occasions, like lying, manipulating, etc. So I'm wondering why that's the case.
Yeah, so there's a lot going on here. So some of the rival views could be grounded. Some of the rival views on how we can account for the function of the communicative power relies on background views of how we determine the functions of a power broadly. And so, as you mentioned, one of the views on how communication developed, of course, that the development of its etiological function it can be an account, and I think we should consider it, but I think we should discount the etiological elements as being in some way evidential, unless we previously established that an etiological account of functions is correct. Certainly it's interesting, but I don't think the etiology of any of the faculties is constraint on its contemporary function. And so
it's
as
not
we
even
talk-
like relevant. It's not even a guide, like at least a heuristic, a rule of thumb. Like I would have thought that like it's at least some evidence that that its current function is such and such, that like it was selected to do such and such or something.
I don't know. I'd have to think about it. I'm not even confident to call it a guide or heuristic.
Okay.
Maybe
That's
I'm
fair.
being overly dismissive, but so maybe something will come to me and I'm like, yeah, okay, maybe it is a guide. At the moment, I think I'm a very forward-looking person on that, and so I do like that. As I say, the biological advantage account is great. I just want to expand it beyond biology. So how I wish that I had, and I think that as part of the research project that is involved in natural law, it would be something that would be a desirable project to come up with a necessary and sufficient account of what's involved in determining a thing's telos. I don't have one. And so when I'm thinking about the end of a faculty or power, I usually analyze it in, you might say, just like intuitive common sense ways. So I start with like things like the heart, and I think, okay, it just seems like the heart is for pumping blood. One reason why is it provides us such a clear advantage, but I don't think it's just that. And so it just seems like purposeful towards this end in a way that's intuitively fitting. And intuitive fittingness is some evidence. It's certainly not the sort of evidence that would be useful in resolving a debate about intuitive fittingness, which seems like exactly what we're doing here. So I think about thought experiments in analyzing each of these powers as being a useful heuristic, more useful than the etiology. The thought experiment that comes to me when I'm thinking about communication involves the phenomenon of locked-in syndrome, and also just like people talking to themselves. So apparently, people, I don't know that I have an internal dialogue or monologue, but like I don't know, like some people when they hear that some people don't have like an internal monologue, they like freak out, like there's zombies among us. And so maybe I'm just not introspective enough to think about it that way, but people have it seems like it's a widespread phenomenon for people to have an internal monologue or dialogue, and that if you ask people, quite a few people do that out loud as long as they're by themselves. And so I think that that's part of communication. I would in fact think that that's perhaps more primitive as a form of communication than its social expression. And that if people were stymied in the ability to communicate out loud what's in their head, even if they were just by themselves, they would feel deeply frustrated, and it would feel like there was something lacking in their life and in their well-being. And so I think if that intuition has any evidential value, then it suggests merely social purpose to communication is too restrictive. Now, I do want to say, obviously, that communication has social advantages, and it is the major way through which we build up bonds, regulate society, etc. And so it's, for natural law, I often think many acts involve more than one power. And I think the social power, for lack of a better word, is a distinct power which often overlaps in particular actions. And so when we, as I speak to you, I'm using my communication power, and I'm also using my social power. And both of them overlap. Both of those powers overlap in the same action. And so the powers for the same action, each of those powers has to be aimed towards its end. And so now that's not an argument, but I guess to go backwards, one main argument or one piece of evidence for the communicative power having a broader than merely social function is the way that we find it fittingly used. It's not just how it's used, because people also use the power to lie. But I think people's intuitions about the fittingness of lies as a useful, proper employment of the communicative power, people, I don't think, have strong intuitions there. I do think people have stronger intuitions that, like that internal monologue being spoken aloud, being appropriate, I think that their intuitions there would be higher or moderate. And if so, I can provide the account that communication is for revealing what's inside of your head. If you felt like that stuff was stuck up there, you would feel almost like something stuck in your teeth, like something is wrong. I need to get it out.
Yeah. So maybe I'll say one thing, and then I'll let you have the final word on this particular point, and then we'll move on to the sexual faculty.
Yeah.
Because I just sort of want to keep the train chugging along.
No, totally.
Okay. So I guess one thing that I would think about saying in response there would be something along the lines of, I feel like we could accommodate that intuition just by saying that, communication has among its purposes, right? Social stuff, social coordination. So it's definitely not like its sole purpose or something like that. But like, that's one among its purposes. Another among its purposes are either, in fact, like maybe revealing what's on your mind, or something more like emotional regulation and planning, which I take, the kind of talk to yourself more to be along the lines of something like that, where, usually people talk to themselves to plan something or whatever. But the broader point that I just want to make here is like, I was thinking maybe the faculty of communication has a sort of panoply of functions, and one isn't sort of misdirecting it from its function by just in virtue of telling a lie, because one might be still directing that faculty to one among its purposes, even if one is not directing it to some other of its purposes. And then it seems like one wouldn't be necessarily misusing it. But I'll let you have the final word on that, and then we can go on to the sexual faculty.
Yeah, so this is actually going to be a what I think of is a more fundamentally metaphysical debate having to do with whether powers can be, you might say, like appropriately multi-track or singular track. And so this has been a debate among powers theorists, how to understand the ontology of our powers. I think the morally relevant powers are going to be multi-track powers that are normatively directed towards a single purpose. So it may be that our powers can have many things that they can do, but it's only one of those things that they should be doing. And so it's multi-track in the sense that, you're right. There's a panoply of ends to which the power of communication can be directed. And that's precisely why reason must order it towards its proper end. It's because it's multi-track. And that differs from powers that are outside of our rational control. And so like my digestive powers, even if I can take things that will affect them, their operation and their it's like how they function, or rather their precise mode of operation, is not directly controllable or imprintable through reason. And so for that reason, they're normatively, I don't want to say irrelevant, but they fall out of the primary object of moral analysis because of their single track pattern, at least single track pattern as affected by reason. So it's only the powers that we can control that we must control. And I agree with you that some of these powers can be directed towards many things, but you might just take it as a primitive part of the account that they have to be directed towards their proper end, and that there is a proper end. And then the question just becomes, what is the proper end? And that's where I'm like, I really should have like a necessary and sufficient condition. I don't, but I'm just using intuitions here. And in most cases, like the heart, it seems to suffice, even if there was something better we could hope for.
Okay, I mean, I think I said, that was the final word on that one. So I think there may be ways to push back, but maybe that will come up in the sexual faculty one.
Well,
so,
could I throw out a question here, and then I'm going to have, it's my show, I'm going to have the last word, right? which is a question. And this is a genuine question, because and since Alex Proust got brought up, he's in the back of my mind. I did a terrible job of doing prep and homework for this, which is to say I did none whatsoever. But if I remember rightly, and maybe you guys remember better, I mean, Proust is pretty stringent on the lying thing, right? But he focuses specifically on asymptotic speech acts. I don't know if that is your account, Brian. And again, we're not here analyzing Proust's take on natural law. We're here looking at Brian's. But I feel like he's willing to say, look, not all speech acts are of that sort. And it's not a perversion to engage in non-asymptotic speech acts. But as soon as you're engaging in assertion, its nature intrinsically is disclosure of the contents of one's mind. So he sort of puts his focus on that.
Yeah.
That's really
So,
just a question. And I just thought I'd throw it out there as it just popped in my head, just so I do something aside from scroll through this document the entire
Pat, you know,
time.
you did you say you did no homework. I showed up and I was eating lunch at 12, and we're doing this at 12:30, and I'm like, oh crap, Joe sent me like 15 pages of notes. So here I am frantically trying to think of prepared answers for each of these.
What? Yeah, but
And so
that's all good. This is like, I love how this is going. Like, everyone's like, okay, let me think about that. This
yeah.
is tough stuff. Like, there's a lot of ground being, traversed here, and I'm really enjoying it so far. So
Yeah.
I appreciate the kind of exploratory and humble nature of it. So yeah, I just want to throw that.
So I do think that that's actually going to come up. Now maybe we'll do a little, just because like there is a lot. So if we did,
Yeah, don't hold up on this. We should move
gesture at
on.
it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But so Joe has this potential counterexample section later in the document. He's got let's see, 5 examples of speech acts and lying and how this comes up, and 2 of them are jokes and magicians and how are you. Sorry, Joe, to steal your thunder ahead of time, but I think these are good questions. And so what I want to say is that revealing your mind is the purpose of the communicative faculty, but that revealing your mind occurs differently depending on speech acts. And I think actually what we should be is semantic externalists about the speech act rules. So what counts as a speech act is, so for the audience, semantic externalism has been made famous by Putnam's twin earth, which has this substance which is a lot like water, but which has a different chemical composition, XYZ. Putnam thinks that on that planet, even if they use the word water, I don't like his, it sounds kind of vulgar, the word that he uses, but we'll call it alternative water. So our water, H2O, is different from their water, XYZ. And he thinks that this is an intuition that many people share, and it should ground semantic externalism about the contents of our words. I think we should be the same kind of semantic externalists about speech acts and what counts as a speech act. And so what counts as a joke or an assertion or a question, etc., is not something semantically internal. And so, what counts as an assertoric speech act has to do with cultural norms that are outside of my control. And so I do think that assertions have their own kind of internally rigorous normative criterion that is extended from revealing your mind as the general purpose of the faculty, but that we also have other purposes in other forms of speech act, all of which aim to reveal your mind, but in different sorts of ways. And so I do think the lying example is focusing on one kind of speech act, the assertoric speech act, and that has its own rules, but they're not in principle different from the rules that operate for communication broadly. And I think we should be semantic externalists about that.
Okay, I'm looking forward to talking about that a little bit later on.
Yeah, we can circle back to that, of course.
Yeah, so let's move now to, still on the sexual faculty, which is at the top of the screen here. It's just similar questions that I had pertaining to the communicative faculty. So perhaps we might think that the sexual faculty has, among its natural ends, reproduction and unity. But I guess my question here would be, why does it not have perhaps a whole panoply of other functions which are not intentionally directed away from when someone, for instance, masturbates? So masturbation, let me just elaborate a little bit and then I'll turn it over to you. So masturbation, of course, is widespread, across the animal kingdom, despite its, apparent costliness at first glance, right? So in terms of like energy expenditure, sperm loss, etc., which at least on its face suggests that it serves multiple functions. And it's unclear why these aren't also functions of the sexual powers that masturbation activates. So there is, of course, what I'm about to say. My understanding is that there's like conflicting research on this particular one, but there is, of course, like the ejaculate maintenance hypothesis, according to which, the regular ejaculation might flush out sperm with damaged DNA or with reduced motility, so it's kind of sperm quality control. There's the view that one function of masturbation is mood regulation and stress control. And I do know that bonobos increase masturbation when they're under social tension and stress, which might suggest a kind of calming and emotionally regulating function. There's a view that, masturbation has a kind of learning and identity shaping function whereby it prepares maturing individuals for sexual intercourse later on by establishing a sense of sexual identity, expression, confidence. And so given all these points, I guess it's not like at least immediately clear to me why the only end or ends of one's sexual powers are reproductive and unitive. Perhaps those are two among a wide range of ends, proper ends, to which the sexual faculty can be directed. And perhaps masturbating can use the sexual faculty in accordance with various of those other ends, even if it doesn't direct the sexual faculty to the end of reproduction specifically on the given occasion of masturbation. And maybe here I'm just, perhaps a different way to frame this question is, why not think that the sexual faculty is a coordinative general purpose power, kind of like hands, where you can use your hands to grasp or handstand or do various other things, or chewing, where like usually, oftentimes, that's like associated with breaking food into bits so that you can eat it. And if you ask the person on the street, hey, what is the power to chew for? It's just to eat. So like the ordinary person would say that. And likewise, the ordinary person might say, the purpose of the sexual faculty is to procreate. But like you think more carefully, you see that chewing is a general purpose coordinative power that can be directed to various ends permissibly. I'm wondering, why is the sexual faculty not like that? Sure, it can be permissibly directed towards procreation, but also mood regulation, stress control, various other things.
So there's a few things to say. And again, I sort of feel like an apology is in order, that I don't have necessary and sufficient conditions to establish the one and only end of a power. I do think that's a worthwhile research element of my current research project. Suffice to say that I'll apply the same kind of intuitive thought experiment style analysis, as well as informed by empirical data, to the sexual faculty as I did to the communicative faculty. So there's a few things to say. First of all, the many advantages you point out to masturbation seem to apply just the same to coitus. So the satisfaction, the calming effect, etc. I'm like, that's like sex, because it is like sex. It's just lacking one of the partners. So those advantages, although offered by masturbation, need be offered uniquely by masturbation, at least none of the ones that you surveyed, because there were quite a few. I didn't notice anything that stood out as being, except perhaps the preparatory element. And to me,
or the explore. So there. Well, hold on. Well, there were sort of two. One was the kind of sperm quality control was one.
Right. You're right.
Another one is I think this is what you were referring to, is the sort of preparatory as one it becomes of age, as it were, becomes of sexual age, a kind of exploration of one's sexual identity, sexual expression, exploring oneself, to be able to be better positioned to have coitus later on.
So I think most of those, the preparatory thing may be one of the unique benefits of masturbation, although I don't think of that as being as you might think of that as like a sort of prima facie benefit. If two sexually immature individuals get married and they have sex for the first time as complete virgins, I don't think that there's harm there. I think that they're both exploring things for the first time together, and that there's something actually quite beautiful about that. So the advantage that you mentioned there, I don't think of it as being an ultima facie advantage. In terms of quality control in the sperm release, I think just regular sex would do the same thing. And so you might think, well, there's a possibility that the first pregnancy, that is from the first time two virgins have sex, that pregnancy will not be as healthy as it could have been if the man had masturbated previously. I'd say that's empirical speculation, and I've never heard evidence, might say empirical validation of that theoretical advantage. Now, it's possible that empirical data comes forward, and I'd say, okay, well, first time people get pregnant, they have a small loss that the first child might be slightly less genetically advantaged than it could have been. But that's highly speculative, because I'm not convinced that such empirical validation would be forthcoming. That said, that's kind of addressing some of the additional concerns. Suffice it, because I don't want the audience to think I would be entirely dismissive towards those advantages. I just think, well, most of them overlap with the advantages of sex itself. All right. So why I think sex itself is for reproduction or procreation rather than let's say, unity or pleasure or calming, because all of these are also general advantages offered by sexual satisfaction. There's a few reasons, and again, these are not they're not systematic insofar as most of these are intuitive and empirical. The first is that nearly everyone who masturbates thinks about a person, and most of the time they're thinking about sexual acts with that person, suggesting that at least the psychological telos of the sexual act has to do with acts that are a lot like reproduction. Because even if you're talking about masturbation while fantasizing about non-reproductive acts, there is a sort of social element that is ubiquitous in a sexual fantasy. Now, there are very strange paraphilias where people might fantasize about an oak tree or a red sports car or things like that, but these most people think of as being unusual to the point of perverse. And so I would say most people would expect you to be fantasizing about another person, suggesting that even from the inside, as it were, people recognize that there's something like a reproductive framework that the sexual power aims towards, which is why fantasizing about another person is much more satisfying than fantasizing about sheets of drywall. So I'd say that's one thing to keep in mind. The other is when you look at the biological systems that are involved, they seem very obviously aimed at procreation. And so, like, if you were to take the female side, female libido almost always peaks in a woman's peak fertility. And so her sexual desirability and desires tend to reach their highest point when she's ovulating or just before ovulation. And so that would suggest that the biological elements that the power supervenes on are very clearly aimed at making children. And the same thing would be true for sperm, but the difference there is that men do not have fluctuations in their fertility, and so men do not normally have fluctuations in their libido, except due to extraneous factors like diet or stress, which can suppress libido. So both on the biological side, which seems very obviously aimed towards the procreative end, and on the psychological side, it seems like the easier case, or the more natural case, perhaps the best explanation for people's widespread intuitions involves sex being for reproduction, not just a general purpose.
Right. Yeah. So I guess the way that I was thinking of a general purpose was not just something that's like hopelessly general and totally divorced from procreation, but something a little bit more, circumspect, where like, or maybe not even like general, but just like it has, going back to the multi-track point. So like, yes, it is true that it's aimed at procreation. That is one among its natural ends.
Yeah.
But it's just one of these cases where it has a variety of natural ends. And one of its natural ends is this, as it turns out, evolutionarily, pretty important, that natural end. So of course, a lot of the biological substructures and whatnot would be geared towards that. But metaphysically speaking, that is just one among its variety of ends. And by directing the relevant powers towards some of its other ends, one would not be directing it away from its natural ends, just towards a different natural end that it does in fact have, and it just turns out to have a number of them. Now, again, this is going to be a circumspect array. It's not going to be hopelessly general, and perhaps a lot of them are going to be close to procreation. Like intimacy with a partner with whom you can, either sustain a family or whatever, or something else. But my point is just that I think this alternative view can account for these reasons for thinking that it is aimed at procreation, because it's aimed at procreation. It just happens to also be aimed at lots of other things, or at least a circumspect array of other things that can be satisfied or fulfilled by masturbation or some other things like that.
Yeah, so maybe one thing to add here is an indirect argument which alludes to a forthcoming publication so I've got a book coming out. It should be later this year called Sex and Theory, in which I argue that only classical natural law has the capacity to explain some Morean facts about sexual ethics. Among them, the absolute impermissibility of bestiality, incest, and necrophilia, among many others. So as you talk about, I realize that your question is not a normative question. It's a, as it were, metaphysical question with normative implications. But so in addition to the metaphysical considerations that I marshaled, I might add one normative consideration, which might supplement. And that's, so the natural purpose being procreation makes it extremely easy to explain Morean facts. Whereas if we open the Pandora's box of sexual purposes while keeping the same normative idea of natural law, we're going to end up with a really wild view. And so, as you mentioned, the permissibility of masturbation, I'm thinking of one of Jonathan Haidt's examples. And I'm just going to do, I don't normally do, as it were, an alert or warning. But look, if you're listening to this with your kids, pause the video. I'm about to talk about something disgusting. All right. And that's so Jonathan Haidt imagines a man going to the grocery store and buying a pre-cooked roaster chicken and then having sex with it in its empty intestinal cavity, and then cooking it and eating it. Now, Jonathan Haidt has found that nearly universally people think that's wrong. And I think it would be a desiderata, perhaps not a decisive desiderata, for a theory to be able to explain why it's wrong. I can explain why it's wrong. And so I think it would be harder to explain why it's wrong on the panoply view. Now, again, this is a normative case for a metaphysical concern, but I do think it's worth mentioning.
Yeah. I mean, I think this. So I think this is also an area that's really interesting because there are general worries about reaching metaphysical conclusions from normative ones. My friend here, Michele Odysseus Impagnatiello, has a forthcoming Journal of Philosophy article where he argues that these sorts of inferences are not, they aren't able to transmit justification, so they're not quite good inferences. But I don't want to get into that. I just want to alert the audience that there are potential issues here, and I also want to say we might think that while we can secure certain desiderata with taking procreation to be the aim or something like that, or a unitive procreative unity to be or organic unity to be a kind of the aim of the sexual faculty, while we might think that there are desiderata that does in fact satisfy, we might think that there are also desiderata that it flouts as well. So that's at least one thing I want the audience also to keep in mind, which is that. So that's going to, perhaps let's just table that, the section 1.3. This next section is going to be the shortest section of all, the normative ethics, because I obviously can't survey the full range of normative ethical views. I just want to alert the audience that arguments for alternative ethical views will ipso facto typically serve as arguments against the relevant alternatives against those, right? So there are lots of other normative ethical views, Rossian deontology, Kantianism, utilitarianism, various stripes, contractualism, virtue ethics, care ethics, etc. And there are various arguments in the literature for each of these. So that's just something for the audience to keep in mind. And of course, there are, as Brian was just saying, there are arguments for natural law theory that would need to be contended with as well.
One brief.
Yeah.
I don't want to do too much self-promotion, but I try to do my best in Sex and Theory to evaluate nearly every contender and analyze its implications for sex. So I think that we need to look at normative alternatives, and I try my best to do that.
Right, exactly. And I mean, of course, this would be a much larger project, but of course, in order to come to an all things considered judgment, we need to look at their consideration or their verdicts about whole concoctions of other domains.
Not just sex.
Sex. War and public policy and lying and all these other things. But okay, so on to the egoism challenge. So I'll spell this out a bit, and then we can turn it over to Brian. So the objection here is that natural law theory, like other eudaimonistic theories, is formally egoistic in that my reasons to benefit others bottom out in considerations about my well-being. So the source of moral reasons for action, in other words, is promoting one's own flourishing or happiness. And I believe Brian even writes in his book introducing and explaining natural law theory that in a theoretical way, all of a person's duties are self-regarding. So on the view in question, we do have don't get me wrong, and don't get natural law theory wrong. On the view in question, we do have obligations to treat other people nicely, right? But that's only because their well-being somehow contributes to your own well-being. But to many, including myself, that seems intuitively quite implausible. I think we have reasons to care about others that don't ultimately bottom out in my own well-being. When I come across a drowning child flailing about in the pond with no one else to save him, I think I have strong reason to wade into the pond and save the child, and this doesn't seem to be only because doing so contributes to my well-being. Instead, it seems incredibly plausible to me that the source of my reason to save the child is like the child's well-being and interests, and perhaps together with a kind of situational relatedness that I occupy with respect to the child as well. But it's not that the child's well-being and interests matter only because it promotes my own well-being and interests, or that's how it seems to me. Now, let me emphasize that the objection here is not that natural law theory encourages you to think even once about how saving a drowning child contributes to your flourishing. So the thought is not that natural law theorists have to kind of go about in the world and think about how does this make me better, something like that. No, that's not the objection. It's a purely structural objection about the source of our moral reasons. Sometimes a moral theory can get the right verdict about a case, but supply the wrong kind of explanation for that verdict. So, for instance, a theory might tell you to save the drowning child because there's some alien, and the alien wants you to save the child, and it turns out that alien's desires are of ultimate moral significance. That's the only thing that matters morally is promoting those desires. Now, such a theory gets the right verdict about what I ought to do in this case, but it identifies the wrong kind of explanation for why I have that obligation. And likewise, so it seems to me that natural law theory gets the right result about many cases where I have a moral reason to benefit others, but it seems to me that it identifies the wrong sort of explanation for why I have that obligation. Intuitively, my reason to save a drowning child doesn't wholly derive from the fact that it'll benefit me somehow. And as an addendum to this point, I also think it's pretty intuitive that even if saving the drowning child required setting back my own well-being in an extremely trivial way, I think that sacrifice to my well-being is just nowhere near as significant or important or morally weighty as the interests of the child in this case. So it seems to me that in this case, I'd be obliged to save the child, even if doing so trivially set back my well-being. And so promoting my well-being doesn't seem to be the ultimate ground for my obligation to save the child. And supposing that I didn't save the child, because doing so, we can suppose, trivially sets back my own well-being in some way, it would just seem to me to be extremely implausible to say, when pressed for justification, about why I let this innocent child drown to death right in front of me, well, that I didn't even want to trivially set back my own well-being. So that is, I take it, perhaps the best way, in my view, to articulate the egoism objection, and I'm curious what Brian would say.
Yeah. So before I respond, I can't help but notice it's 10-3, and so I just want to make sure that everyone's good for time. I have something in about 40 minutes where it'll be a hard deadline for me. So as we I say this because I think the egoism challenge, if I had to rank, and we may or may not have the opportunity to rank these, if I had to rank the most interesting, provocative challenge to natural law, and I had to put something in the S tier, egoism challenge is in the S tier for me.
Okay.
Yeah. And so I say that because it's okay, we got 40 minutes. I feel like we could easily make an hour and a half discussion of this point by itself, nothing else included. So I don't want to do that and then prevent you from talking about things that you find more interesting if we have to skip forward.
I mean, we can talk about. Listen, I mean, we can. I'm fine with
Yeah, I didn't want to be the first buzzkill, but I got a time limit around then as well, Brian.
That's
so
okay.
I would like you guys to kind of pick and choose where you want to.
Yeah, and if we wanted, I mean,
we can always do a part. I'm always happy to.
Yeah, I was about to say
for
if
part
we wanted,
2 or something like that. Yeah,
it might be difficult to fit with my schedule, but I could possibly fit it in, and I could likely fit it in. I'm guessing.
Well, the nice thing is you don't have to prep anything more. If we do a part 2, you just hop on.
Right, that is true. Yeah, that is true. Yeah. So maybe we could do a part 2 on just.
I'd be happy to do that.
The counterexamples. Okay, yeah, that sounds good.
Okay, so for the egoism challenge, let me just say why I think this is S tier, and it's not because straightforward theoretical reasons, and it's not because of intuitions. There's a long strand of Thomistic ethics, which sees the individual good as less important than the social good, and I do not know how to square that with things that Thomas himself says about moral motivation, which I think are more theoretically plausible than this long strand of treating the individual good as less significant. I just do not know how to square those two together. And so I go with what I think is the more plausible interpretation. And I think it's more plausible because of things that Thomas himself says explicitly. I also think it's more plausible because it explains things in contemporary metaethics that I think are worries that we should all be concerned by. So it's both for, you might say, like up and up contemporary analytic concerns, as well as what most of the audience won't care that much about, but that is interpretive concerns with staying true to Thomas. Because I think he's smarter than I am and more likely got it right than I did. If we're going to diverge, I'd rather go with him. All right, so the egoism challenge. Why do I think the egoism challenge is not that big of a concern? One of the reasons why is I just don't share many of the intuitions that people have about the wrong reasons. So let me just say what I think is true in this area to restate the case. I think we are naturally inclined to pursue our own individual happiness, and that this natural desire explains why we have reasons at all. That only this pre-existing and, as it were, ineradicable conative state can explain why any other fact counts as a reason for us. So it doesn't have to be pursuing my own happiness, but having some pre-existing conative inclination, desire, whatever you want to call it, and for the sake of which I choose. Without that, it makes it very hard for me to see how anything will have motivational power. And I think reasons should have motivational power, that's built into it. All right. I think that Bernard Williams, when he raises the amoralist consideration, brings us to the fore. So I think a lot of theories, including what seems to be trending up, which is this pluralistic form of consequentialism, has at least in my view, has a harder time explaining why the amoralist challenge, or how to face the amoralist challenge. So the amoralist challenge, it goes something like this. You could provide the best moral case to an individual, and it might just not move them in any way. They might say, but what has this to do with me, right? Why? I'm not motivated by it. I don't see any of these as reasons. What does this have to do with me? And I think facing the sort of like a excessively individualistic rational egoism as a challenge, this amoralist who cares only about his own individual concerns, is an important part of a metaethical solution. And I think that among the natural states, that your own happiness makes the most sense of the choices that we make. As a matter of motivational explanatory sufficiency. Now, of course, this is a normative point as well as a metaethical point, but I think the metaethical point is that ethics should be able to explain why the amoralist is seeing things wrong. And I think I can explain that by adopting what I consider to be a non-pernicious form of egoism. So what's a pernicious and what's a non-pernicious? I'd say the pernicious form of egoism, you might call it a rational egoism, which treats the individual person's preferences, desires, etc., that is qua individual, the token person, as having ultimate moral relevance, and in fact, like decisive moral relevance. I think of that as pernicious, and I think that such an egoist will often fail in altruistic duties because they don't satisfy some individual pet project of his or hers. That to me is pernicious. I wouldn't want to adopt a view like that. And I've got strong intuitions against that kind of egoism. I suspect that those who object to natural law because of its so-called egoism are doing so because they associate what I consider to be a non-form of pernicious egoism too closely with that kind of, you might call it like Ayn Rand sort of self-interest. And I don't want anything to do with her from start to finish.
Very good. Thank you.
Stay away. All right. But that said, I think a non-pernicious form of egoism that can explain to the amoralist why he should care about morality can start with the fact that moral choices promote our own well-being, and that every individual moral choice does promote our well-being, which is why even the amoralist is making some sort of error in dismissing moral considerations, because they do benefit him, but they don't benefit him in a uniquely token individual way. They benefit him because he's a human being, and all human beings are benefited by moral principles. Moral principles, in fact, describe the successful routes to happiness and to human well-being and flourishing, which the amoralist has even if he says he doesn't, has a predetermined desire for. And so he will always want what morality gets us to, even if he denies it. So I think that's maybe the best place to start, is that human happiness can explain why moral considerations will always have motivational force for every individual, even someone who claims not to care about them, because the things that they say they're going to care about are almost always going to be related to this ultimate goal of happiness. Maybe you want to respond, and then I can explain more.
Yeah, that sounds good. So, I mean, one thing to say just at the outset is that even if I accepted that like this is the best way, maybe even the only way to meet the amoralist challenge, I would just take that as one benefit of natural law theory that's to be weighed against the cost of its egoism. So because I still have these strong intuitions, and I just would need to weigh those against its ability to solve the amoralist challenge. But that's just one thing. Like I just want to, I want the audience to recognize that like it's not fully smooth sailing just by saying that it solves the amoralist challenge, because I just think we should weigh that against the strong intuitions, at least that I have, that are very anti-egoistic.
That's fair.
So that's one thing that I want to say, and that's just a more sort of preliminary thing. A second thing that I want to say is like, I don't know, like the amoralist challenge seems to me to have bite, as it were, precisely because it's like he's an amoralist. Like he doesn't get morality. Morality is other regarding. Like, and so like it's precisely a challenge, because like we think like, how are we to get this person who is only self-regarding? How are we to give them like normative justification to be other regarding? Like that's what seems to me to be like almost like what makes it so challenging, is because this person doesn't seem to get morality, which is at least partly fundamentally other regarding. Whereas I don't think that eudaimonistic accounts are able to at least explain that. Like they're almost unable to explain why this would be so mystifying in the first place. Like why the amoralist challenge is so difficult to address in the first place. Like if we thought eudaimonism was particularly plausible, then like of course the amoralist challenge isn't even a challenge at all. Like the person is just confused. He's thinking that morality is other regarding, which he doesn't care about. But no, actually, it's like totally self-regarding ultimately. So I don't know. It seems to me that like the bite of the amoralist challenge, it has bite precisely because we sort of recognize that the amoralist is not getting morality. Morality is other regarding, and that's what makes it a particularly thorny and difficult challenge. So that's a second response that I'd want to give to that.
So maybe just to quickly, you might have more, but to clarify what you're saying that the amoralist challenge is almost one of like psychology or persuasion. It's like the amoralist just is just missing an area of reality, like someone who's colorblind, and they're sort of like morality blind, but nothing we could say could motivate them. You might say essentially, we might accidentally get them moving in favor of morality, but in their state of colorblindness, they might just never be capable of seeing the benefit or
right. And that explains why this is so difficult and why everyone's like racking their brains about it. Whereas like this wouldn't be a particularly difficult challenge if like we were, we had, if we were eudaimonists. It's just like, this is silly. Like, what are you worrying about? Like, morality is self-regarding.
But I just want to clarify. So what you're saying is, for the natural lawyer, it's not a problem at all. And I'd say yes.
Well, no, but they're missing a data point, which is that Williams's amoralist challenge is actually particularly thorny and difficult, and it does actually seem to be particularly challenging, precisely because the person doesn't seem to get morality. Like what's driving the force behind the amoralist challenge is that morality appears to be other regarding. And so, sure, I guess in some sense they're like solving it, but that, I mean, it's like the eliminativists solving the hard problem of consciousness by eliminating
Okay, I
consciousness.
get that.
That's how it seems to me.
Yeah.
So that's a second response that I would give to that. And then I guess the third response that I would give, and I have two further, so the third and the fourth response. So the third response that I would give is, it doesn't really seem plausible to me that reasons should have, motivational force. I just feel like we just very often can completely fail to see the motivational force of various reasons. And one way to bring this out is like through epistemic reasons. Like I think for someone who, like let's say this for a particular belief, it's totally divorced from their practical interests, from their well-being. We might think like pre-theoretically it's totally divorced from their well-being. Like it's something about like the number of grass, the number of blades of grass on the lawn of the White House in like 1799 or at 4:15 p.m. on like June 13th or something. Like totally divorced from their prudential interests and whatnot. Like so, like they truly don't care. They do not give a damn whether or not they have a true or false belief about this. And like they're like faced with the option of just like popping a pill to give them a false belief about this. And the pill has no other benefits, no other side effects or anything like that. I think that like they have an epistemic reason not to like induce themselves to get like a false belief, even though they don't give a damn. And I might not be able to convince them. I'm just going to be ending up fist pounding like truth matters, damn it. Like, and like we should.
Which I can explain very well. Natural law can explain very well. I think that intuition, just as an aside.
Well, this might be bleeding into the fourth point, but like, okay. Anyway, I do think that there are epistemic reasons that we have, which even perhaps like none of us may be able to act in accordance with. Like maybe we are just like blinded by confirmation bias at certain points or whatever, and the reasons may just be unable to have motivational force for us. But nevertheless, we have epistemic reasons to believe the things in question, and it just that at least seems totally coherent to me. I don't even need to claim that is in fact the case, but like I can imagine us being so blinded by confirmation bias that, or some other kind of bias where we are just unable to even appreciate the force of certain epistemic reasons that we do in fact have. And that at least challenges the claim that like reasons must have motivational force, because it seems to me totally coherent and conceivable that there would be epistemic reasons that don't have any motivational force. So that's a third reply. And then very briefly, the fourth reply, and what I said about the truth pill kind of, or the falsity pill kind of bleeds into this. And it's almost like the a-prudentialist challenge instead of the amoralist challenge.
Yeah.
It's like,
well, I was thinking that was like the a-epistemicist or something like that.
Yeah. The a-epistemicist challenge.
Amoralist. Yeah.
Right. So like maybe one instance of this is like future Tuesday indifference. So like the person just genuinely does not give a damn what happens to them on the next Tuesday. So they'll plan their things around it. Like, and you try to convince them, but they're just like, they just don't get it. They don't see why that would be of any importance whatsoever. Or they just like, they might just say, why should I care about my objective flourishing? Like you've got all these notions that are super restrictive on me, like why care about my objective flourishing? All I care about is like my subjective feelings or whatever. And I just want to, actualize and fulfill my current desires for what I do today. And it seems like, how are you supposed to convince this person that their objective flourishing is like normatively significant? Because again, they don't care about that. So it's like, I think there's a significant a-prudentialist challenge that even faces eudaimonistic theories. So anyway, I put a lot on the table there.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. I like that. Why should I care about my objective flourishing? I want to think about that, because you might think that the amoralist challenge redux there,
right,
for natural law theory. Yeah, no, that's cool.
It's like a revenge problem. It's like when people give the liar paradox and then they're like, this statement is false. Well, what if that's just like neither true nor false? But like, what if I say this statement is not true? Crap, it just re-arises, the problem re-arises. So right.
Yeah, no, that's good. I want to think about that, and I want to have a more, I don't want to give a quick answer to that, because I think that's interesting. And
but that's fair. Philosophy is best done slowly. As
I agree with that. Yeah. All right, so there were several things going on. One thing that we hit on, but obliquely. So I guess maybe one way to say an advantage to being what I consider to be a non-pernicious egoist is that it can give two outcomes that many moral realists like, and that is both motivational internalism and reasons internalism. And these are the Well, I guess I should look at Phil's surveys before I say these are majority views, but these are
I'm not
at
sure
least,
they are at this point. I'm not sure they are.
yeah, philosophers. But
Not-
hey,
you're looking at an externalist here, so.
oof. All right. So, if you like if you're pulled by, let's say, intuitive cases favoring motivational internalism and reasons internalism, then not rational egoism, a non-pernicious form of egoism can satisfy, can produce, and explain pretty well both motivational internalism, which is that we should always have, as it were, this internal motivation to be moral, and that moral considerations should pull us, and that the amoralist is as it were, he's confused. He doesn't see the connection between the moral principles and his own flourishing, which he ineradicably does care about. And so he should be motivated, and like whether he buys the account or not, at least in principle, it's a resolvable difficulty. And then also reasons internalism, which says that those reasons provided should pull him, that they should have motivational force. These are popular. Now, I don't think natural law needs them. I don't think you have to be a natural lawyer and endorse them. And it may be that there are strands of natural law, and especially for those people who are like, oh, this is it. The egoism that's the reason why I can't follow it. I'll say and repeat myself that of all the objections that I'm the most worried about, it's this one. And it could be that there are more satisfying accounts of natural law out there. Now, one thing to say is, like, in many ways, I feel like I'm involved in a recovery project because natural law is dead. Functionally, it's dead. You can't, as far as I can tell, you can't even take grad level classes on natural law itself at CUA or pontifical universities. As a moral theory, it's dead. And so I'm recovering what I think is the best strand of it, but there could be others that want to recover a different strand, and more power to them. I think that, I don't want to let 1,000 flowers blossom, but like 4 or 5 might be kind of nice in natural law, just so people have options. And maybe another shameless plug, as the editor of the Journal of Natural Law, which has its forthcoming issue this fall, for those people who are like, yeah, I'd like to do something different than what you're doing. Please remember the journal is interested in ideas like that and research projects beyond just the, you might say, super traditional form of it. All right. All said, if you like if you like motivational internalism and reasons internalism, here's a way to get there. Have a non-pernicious form of egoism. Now, why do I think this is non-pernicious? It's because all the considerations are operating at a theoretical level, and at no point, except points that I think are actually intuitively appealing, at no point do selfish concerns arise when dealing with others. So it's because we have a natural sociality that we take a special consideration for the satisfaction of other people's rights. Okay, so a couple of points here theoretically. First, because we see that we're involved in the same general project that other people are involved in, namely pursuing our own flourishing, we should never intervene or contravene another's pursuit in favor of our own, because we should see them as having something like an ontological parity. That is, their pursuit is no ontologically worse off or less important than mine, or maybe I should say axiologically no more important than mine. That said, that's their pursuit and not mine. So the other regardingness of natural law essentially, or rather, the egoistic element essentially pertains to explaining why I should help people rather than explaining why I shouldn't harm people. I think the non-harm obligations essentially arise because of my recognition of the other person's rights, which arise from them and not from me. Those rights are in them, and I have to respect them because they're in them. But the social power, which also involves helping others pursue their happiness, that is, assisting them, I think that that part of the socialization arises because we are inclined towards a community, and that community's flourishing or functioning is called the common good. And my understanding of the common good is that it's a proportional sharing of the social goods of that group, so that the more you give, the more you are given. The more you contribute, the more others contribute towards you. And that social harmony is not something that's just like a brute fact about morality, but is something to do with us as individuals. Primarily, we're not self-sufficient. And so, because of our lack of self-sufficiency, we enter within society, and we want that society. We are inclined by our natural social power to pursue in that society that kind of flourishing and functioning. Okay, so it's my own, as it were, self-regarding concern that helps me enter into society, and it's for the sake of reciprocal exchange in that society that I contribute. Otherwise, if you think of like, it's really easy to see this in utilitarianism. A utilitarian would have you crush yourself under massive boulders if it led to marginal gains in social goods. If the utilitarian calculus had a very marginal, trivial gain by you crushing yourself under a pile of boulders, perhaps it would just mean a large group of people thought it was hilarious. So it's this very transient and marginal gain for society. You should do that. You should trigger the avalanche and die. And I think that's absurd. And between the absurdity of that, which is like, you might say, if we've got poles here, that's the extreme other regarding, versus natural law. I want to say this is the Goldilocks region right here. It's not the pernicious form of egoism that just says do everything just for your own, just look out for number one. But I can explain, why do we enter society? We enter society because we're not self-sufficient. We need others, and we want others. We want to participate in that mutual exchange, but we look in that exchange to proportional reciprocation, which is self-regarding. We would feel like this society is harming us if we give and give and give, and we never are given. And I'd say that would be like, those of you who are in college students know this perhaps better than most of us, because there are toxic groups of friends, and it just takes a while. You're a freshman, you get with those friends, and then it takes a while to realize you give and give and they don't give back. And so like, it's appropriate in those circumstances to say, this society is not good for me. This little clique is not good for me. I should withdraw from that. I should go to a group that gives as well as gets. And I'd say I can explain that through a non-pernicious form of egoism, that society is not good for you, precisely because in some ways it's operating according to consequentialist principles, according to which giving is just for its own sake, and it's never for the sake of what you get back. And so I can explain why that element of self-regardingness is appropriate, healthy. And I do think that's intuitive, that people think they should pull out of social groups that, as it were, treat them like some sort of host, and they're the parasites. So I don't know if that's satisfying, but at least that's maybe one additional consideration favoring a bit of egoism.
Right. So I do think we're definitely going to have some self-regarding reasons in the picture, and I think those will be able to help explain these cases. I still find myself strongly with the initial intuitions, for instance, in the drowning child case, that even if there are self-regarding reasons present in the case, like, the child, for instance, I'm giving to society by helping the child or whatever, and the child can go on to be inspired by me and give to me more, or other sorts of things. That doesn't seem to me to be like, at least in these particular situations, like of ultimate normative significance, or at least to be the only thing of ultimate normative significance, and my other regarding reasons only derive from the self-regarding reasons. So I think in these cases, I do in fact have, yes, self-regarding reasons. And maybe, I mean, I could even accept that they are of like fundamental normative significance. They don't derive from anything else. It just so happens that I likewise have other regarding reasons, and it's not that I have those solely because of the self-regarding reasons, and it's motivated by the intuitions mentioned at the beginning. So it seems to me that we can sort of explain these verdicts about why one is still able to take these self-regarding actions, while nevertheless not going in for the kind of, at least in my view, quite radical egoistic conclusion that all of our reasons kind of ultimately bottom out in self-regarding reasons. And just to elaborate a little bit on that second point, like I do think that there are even other, like, I mean, I just gave a kind of answer, which is maybe a sort of mid-level talking about reasons. I wasn't adopting a normative theory, but we could maybe potentially bolster that point by adopting, or at least proffering other normative ethical theories, which aren't just like radical as like utilitarianism and demanding like you to be totally self-sacrificial in these cases where it seems quite plausible that you should not do that, or at least you're permitted to not do that, and utilitarianism doesn't even allow that. But which are such that they're not egoistic theories. So we might think, I mean, just even going back to the discussion you had, what was that, like 4 or 5 years ago with Dustin? I think Dustin is at least sympathetic to contractualism, or maybe like a slightly modified contractualism. But it does seem to me that like, so for the audience, contractualism says something like the content of our moral duties is determined by what no one could reasonably reject, or what none of us could reasonably reject in a fair decision situation, or something like that. If we were deciding on rules for the legislation of society or something like that. And it just does seem to me that it's way too demanding on one, way too much of a demand that, and I would be able to reasonably reject the demand to sacrifice my life for the sake of comparably insignificant pleasure, even for a large number of people. So I think that other non-egoistic theories can account for this. I also think arguably like virtue ethics can account for this. Like I think the virtuous agent does actually have some degree of self-regard. It's not a kind of trumping degree of self-regard, but just generally some kind of commitment to their own preservation or something like that.
Now, this gets really tricky because, a lot of the virtue ethics traditions have been eudaimonistic. And so
this is true.
Like,
I mean,
Swanton's view is explicitly non-eudaimonistic. And so perhaps her view seems to be the most open to just like straight up self-sacrifice. But like the classic views like Sloat and Hursthouse are explicitly eudaimonistic in a way that it would actually favor this kind of egoism. The one that I like.
Right. Oh, yeah. I mean, that's a really helpful observation for the audience as well. So, and I should have clarified. That's a really good point. I'm really just thinking like there are at least some virtue ethical theories on which are not egoistic and which would be able to explain the relevant verdicts. But that's like at the level of normative ethical theories, and I don't quite myself have a settled view on which normative ethical theory specifically is correct. So, like, I would be more comfortable with the earlier response that I gave, which is a little bit more mid-level, and just talking about that we do in fact have self-regarding reasons. It's just to preserve the relevant intuitions. It seems to me that they shouldn't be of like the sole ultimate determinant of morality. So that would probably be how I respond to that. Now,
I think
before I turn over to you, I think, did you say 40 minutes? Was that like 30 minutes ago? So
this might be a good place to hit pause just so we don't start something and have to and then like cut it off. Like,
that's great. I just wanted to, before we wrap up completely, because you did mention contractualism, like Scanlon style contractualism. I brought up the point in the debate with Dustin, and I'm now even more convinced of it 4 years later than I was then, that at bottom it's hard to avoid contractualism being a form of egoism, and here's why. The primitive, you might say the most basic element in contractualist ethics is the disposition, which Scanlon treats as accidental and non-essential, is the disposition to stand in a position of mutual recognition or mutual regard towards others. And so it's only on the condition that an individual wants to stand in a position of mutual recognition that considerations of non-rejectability have normative significance for himself, but even more interestingly, for others. So Scanlon treats, you might say, as fundamentally other anyone who doesn't want to stand in a place of mutual recognition with the rest of society. So it turns out that a person's rights depend entirely on their willingness to stand in this position of mutual recognition, which is very, very interesting. And so it seems like the starting point of ethics is your own accidental, non-essential desire to stand in this kind of reciprocity relation. And I think, I mean, what grounds that desire, I don't know. Especially since for Scanlon, he seems to actively envision people who don't have that. Maybe he's sort of like opening the door to criminals or execution or something like that because they fail to stand in this position of mutual recognition. But at any rate, it seems like one could plausibly say that there's something self-regarding in the choice, the initial choice to stand in this position of mutual recognition. And if so, then it seems like contractualists at bottom have a self-regarding choice as being the first mover in the normative enterprise.
Right. So I was thinking maybe that we could call that like Scanlonian contractualism.
Yeah.
And this is actually why I said earlier, like maybe a modified version of contractualism.
Kant has a contractualist account too that's like Scanlon's inspired by. So maybe someone could mine the resources or combine it with like a pluralistic consequentialism.
Yeah, or some sort of like philosophical rules could get in, but also like what I was thinking was the modified version would be like the condition in question would not be that they like want to stand in this particular second personal relation or that they desire it. I would not want to go that Scanlonian route. I would like, and again, I'm not like committing myself for the audience. I'm not committing myself to contractualism here. My point is that there's a modified version which speaks not of the desire to stand in this second personal relation, but like the objective value of there being such a second personal relationship, which is not dependent on anything relating to one's sort of self-interest or what have you. It's just a valuable state of affairs. So that could be the kind of fundamental locus as well. And it wouldn't have to be conditioned on one's wants. And so it wouldn't have to ultimately be kind of egoistic, I don't think, at least the modified version. So I just wanted to say that, and maybe that's a good place to end. And for the next time, we can potentially go over the conceivability challenges, which are actually going to be relatively brief, and then we can just trust me on that one. Trust me, they are going to be relatively brief. There are only 3 of them.
Hey, I was so excited. Do you know how many times grotesque torture in all caps comes up? I was so excited for that.
Yes.
I feel like the audience should be at the edge of their seat, waiting for part 2 to get to grotesque torture.
It's all about creating a soap opera sequence here.
Yeah, and then we'll go through the counterexamples in that as well. So yeah, I'd be happy to schedule part 2. Let's
awesome. Well, thank you both so much. This has been a delight, and I really have enjoyed the role you have assigned me of scrolling up and down this document here. And before we go, let's make sure that you both at least get a brief mention of what you're doing and where people can find you on the internet. Joe, you're all sorts of places, but your YouTube channel and podcast, of course, deserve a mention. So why don't you go first, and we'll finish with Brian. Yep.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And yeah, thanks, Brian, for this wonderful discussion, for Pat for hosting it. I really appreciate it. And I think we're able to canvass a lot of really important issues, and I think it's going to be super helpful for the audience. So I'm excited about that. So in terms of where people can find me, of course, the objectively best YouTube channel that has ever existed is Majesty of Reason. So everyone should immediately go and click subscribe.
The greatest YouTube channel. Have you guys seen that cartoon Mario movie?
Oh my God.
Of course you have. Well, there's a like a Donkey Kong in there. He says, "The greatest army in the world," and my kids always quote it. So yeah, the greatest YouTube channel in the world.
Yeah,
that'll land with a few people out there.
Absolutely. So yeah, Majesty of Reason. Got a blog by the same name, majestyofreason.wordpress.com. I do popular, of course, work there, but also I do public work or like scholarly work in philosophy. So people can check out my publications on my website, josephschmid.com. So yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Joe. Brian, what are you up to?
Yeah. And again, Joe, I think that you've done a really valuable service, although we might not agree at the end. I think this is just the best array I've seen. So I really appreciate that. I really look forward to part 2. I hope the audience does too. In terms of what's going on with me right now, Sex and Theory will be out with Palgrave later this year. It's in the pre-production phase right now. So we just decided on the cover, etc. So it should be coming out in the fall. And also the inaugural issue of the Journal of Natural Law, published by Catholic University of America Press, should also be out this fall. And currently my projects are editing a book favoring integralism, which is a political philosophy. And also, Jonathan Fuqua and I have a book in contract with Routledge defending a Morean methodology in ethics. So it's something that I touch on in Sex and Theory. That is the role that Morean facts should play in constraining and defending moral theories. But Jonathan and I are going to expand on that, not just in normative ethics regarding sex, but across the board in, let's say, talking through debunking arguments, etc. Some of the things which have actually come up today. And so just a broad Morean metaethical defense.
Awesome. Well, thanks again to both of you fine gentlemen, and thanks to everybody who has been listening. If you like this sort of thing, if you enjoy these sorts of conversations, be sure to subscribe and click all the buttons, the share and the comment, of course. And we appreciate all of you, and we'll see you in part 2, hopefully soon. Bye-bye.